In introducing Margaret, I've just spent a week with Margaret as a course member on a course she was leading on. And it's given me a sore head because I've got so much to think about and go away. And somebody said to me this morning, "Are you still going on courses at your age?" As it's in advance of the next stage, you know, how to look after oneself without having children doing it all the time. And I think that I couldn't come away with more thinking than I did in the last week's learning. I'm hoping we'll get some of that today. Margaret's very welcome to Scotland, has started practicing in this territory, but many years before that, in the same year as Slade went to #1 with Merry Christmas. You hear that every year. So I think from now on you'll be thinking about Margaret Wheatley almost every week and that for a while, because I don't know anybody that doesn't come across a material and say, I need to take that and spread it out. I have a view that a lot of books I've read on leadership and management and change over the years give me a few ideas, but it's a waste of another 200 pages. I don't find that in any of Margaret's books. She has the most recent one, Turning to One Another, which is updating thinking, and one of the things I like about the thinking in Margaret's books is that she goes back and reflects, I believe, and I stand to be corrected, Margaret, if go back and say, no, I think something different from that now because I've moved on, the world's moved on, and we've moved on. I kind of like that, because it means you can still use the original perspective, but say how things have changed and confess to it and say it's all right to move on with it. And I think that's important. My two favourite reads at the minute are dipping into a simpler way, and I like the way you can dip into that. I like the use of poetry and creativity in it, and small in scale, physically, but I think incredibly rich, a kind of wallet, handbag, side pocket publication, Perseverance. I think it says a lot of what I have to do in the world I work in government and local public sector. Because if you didn't have it, I don't know what you'd do. Perseverance and a good friend somewhere is how you get by. And it's hard work, so I think there's a lot of richness in there, so I hope you will get a chance to it. And I know Margaret's books are really popular, because the ones we put out for reference are being read in the room as we speak, because they're not there. So I know they're popular. So if you have managed to flash read them, somebody else might want to. Just share it, you know. But I think you'll get the idea. So since '73, this has been Meg's life. And she tells me that before that, you know, there was a science thing in it. And I think what you'll hear here is an interesting perspective on science and spirit and emotion and heart and mind. And I find that a fascinating area in our kind of work. So I'm not going to say any more. I just wanted to link up the business side of what we are doing here. Meg Wheatley, you're very welcome back to Scotland. We're looking forward to hearing from you very, very much. And you have an hour and a half. Or thereabouts, and we're looking forward to you filling that fabulously. Thank you. Meg Wheatley.
I was brought up by a British father who emigrated to the US, definitely because he wanted a different life, but with that very strong, you know, everybody's equal, don't give yourself airs, never praised for anything I did. Always just trying to hold the lid on me. And that was half of my upbringing, and the other half was a Jewish activist grandmother who was always saying, you must write, I mean, she said this to me at age 5, you must write, you must make a contribution, you must go out in the world, and you're very talented. That's why I spent many years getting over my British side. Because it's kind of paralyzing. What also made me feel very sad listening to this litany of the way you hold yourself, which is actually very Western, but more extreme here perhaps. But what made me so sad, and it does frequently, is how far Western culture strayed from understanding human nature. So I've just been reading a little history, and it was the Greeks who believed that the senses did not give us any valid information. That if you could prove something by logic, such as I could logically prove that this glass is not moving, then even if I saw it moving in Greek tradition, I would discount that. For me, in this modern day, what we're seeing is not tuning in to our sensory information, not tuning into our emotions, not tuning into anything that really describes human nature, and instead feeling, as you will hear me speak in detail, that we can just treat human beings as senseless, I like the use of that word right there, senseless machines from whom we need to get certain things. And I've just written my 7th book, which will be out in October, and in that book I ask that each of us choose a new role for ourselves, which is to be warriors for the human spirit. Warrior I use from a different tradition, from Tibetan, because warriors in Tibet are not aggressive. In fact, they're just the opposite. A warrior is one who is brave enough not to use aggression to accomplish what needs to be accomplished. So I'm using it, it's a very provocative word, I know that, but using it in this sense of, can we who work deep in community understand that our task truly is to be warriors, champions, defenders, whatever word you want to use, for the human spirit. So I'm going to explore several of the dynamics that I see evident in the world at large that, to sum up, to conclude where I'm going with this, is that the dynamics that are increasing in the world these days are very destructive of the human spirit. And they're very destructive of all the great words that Rory just used about, they're destructive of community, confidence, capacity, creativity. And I want to explore those and offer them to you, not from a Scottish perspective, but from a global perspective. I have the incredible privilege of speaking to a lot of people from many different cultures. I'm always listening to what sounds the same, because underneath our different cultural expressions, we are motivated, I will declare till I die, by very basic needs that give us enormous capacity. So I have found that this is true, that there is no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about. And the reason this works, when we do come together, the reason it works so well is because humans have certain things in common everywhere. We have a great need to be together. We have a great need to see our children's lives improve, or at least them not to die and suffer. So working on issues of children is, I think, the strongest way of bringing community together. And we also have a great desire as human beings to learn and to grow. So all of this craziness that's come about in Western culture, which is that learning, we have to use this term lifelong learning. Well, actually a scientist friend of mine said, any living system is a learning system. If you don't learn, you die. So it's basic. Living and learning should be absolute synonyms, replaceable, one for the other. And humans have a great need to contribute to something beyond themselves. Well, that's enough to build on, isn't it? You know, a desire to learn, a desire to be together, a desire to contribute, and a desire to see their children's welfare extended into the future. That's more than enough to work with. I also want to say one thing, Carol, that in my own experience, I have worked in enough cultures now, many of them are Aboriginal or traditional cultures, in which there never was the ego, the individual was never put first. So therefore, it wasn't about putting your head up above the parapet or the tall poppy syndrome, as they call it in Australasia. It was much more about what is your unique gift to the community. And when I've been in those cultures, people are joyful, naturally, because they're not defending an ego, they're participating in something. It's not all rosy, because communitarian cultures are very limiting for individual expression. But in West Africa, when a woman announces she's pregnant, the question is, what is the gift that this child is bringing to our community at this time? Not, there they go again, they're breeding like flies. What are we going to do about population overgrowth? But instead, what is the gift that this child is bringing to us at this time? They actually talk to the child in the womb and name the child in the womb. Doesn't that just sound beautiful? Imagine to be welcomed for what you were going to contribute rather than being seen as a problem on social welfare rolls. So we got it wrong, and I think it is our task, those of us who do work with a broad variety of people and who work in community, it is our task to become revolutionary in that we do become warriors for the human spirit. And so I want to lead you through both the dark and the light around that theme. So I first want to do my best to express in quite depressing detail some of the dynamics that seem everywhere in the world that divide us rather than bring us together. So allow yourself to just take this in. Sometimes people say, well, I don't want to hear all that dark, depressing information. But what I found is that our denying of what's going on, or our hope that it's really not as bad as we experience it day to day, that denial is keeping us from, one, coming together as true partners, and two, it takes a lot of energy to deny and to stay cheerful. I'm much more interested, not in optimism or pessimism, but I'm much more interested in being clear that what is my work? What is it that I want to contribute for this time? And I don't think any of us can make a clear assessment of what is my work until we're in the realization, okay, what am I up against? What is going on in the world? So that's why I start with this. You will be inspired by the end, but I hope for having gone through the reality of what's going on. It's a very dark time everywhere. So this is an old slide. I would not even use this. I thought of changing it last night. The era of doing more with less. This is now the era of being squeezed for every pound of flesh you have, with budget cuts and redundancies and going down past lean, going down to cutting into the bone. And it just continues. It doesn't stop. It's also an era of increasing polarization, which in some cases I think is quite deliberate on the part of leaders. You know, you set people against each other, you make the other the enemy. Do you use the word othering here now? No, it's become a nice phrase in the US, although we don't mean it. You know, we have to stop othering. We have to stop separating ourselves by ethnic group, age group, gender, whatever all the different categories are. And it's also an age of increasing fear and anxiety. I don't know about your own anxiety level, but you could think about whether it's increased in the past 5 years or so. When you look to the future, this is especially terrible among youth. If you ask them to think about the future, they actually can't, in my experience. It's like, why would I even think about that? You know? But for those of us who've been out in life for many years, there's also an increasing anxiety about where it's all heading, because as Rory alluded to, we can think back to times when people used to like talking to each other, when life was slower, when there was time for casual conversation. And we know what we've lost. This is not about old folks reminiscing. For me, this is knowing what we lost in this frenetic speed up. But I want to say something particular about fear, because what I see happening is it's a deliberate tactic used by politicians everywhere to get what they want. And this is historically tried and true process here. You make people afraid, they surrender their liberty, and you know, the other thing we surrender when we're afraid and anxious is we surrender our human brains or our human minds. We surrender, we lose the capacities when the human brain is under stress. We lose the capacity to envision, to connect the dots, to make moral judgments, to think in a futuristic way. We lose the ability basically to think, to reason, and to care. The one thing, some people have estimated that we humans lose 95% of our capacity when we're under stress. I personally, now that I see how little thinking goes on, how little moral judgment, how little morality counts, how much narcissism is instantly available to politicians, and I'm not talking about any one country. This is very generalizable in my experience. We are being manipulated by fear and anxiety. There is an antidote to this, which is called taking time to think. And I will encourage you to that by the very end, but that's an important thing to note here. We really need to understand that in this day and age, we are devolving as a species. I don't know another way to describe it. If we're losing these higher level human capacities, which we developed over millennia, then this can only be seen as a time of devolution, except for the few warriors for the human spirit who remember that human beings are capable of coming together, working for the future, and wanting to share in productive work. I told you this is going to be depressing. It's also in a culture of blame, denial, avoidance. How often do you hear a politician make a statement and it's not dealing with evidence, it's not dealing with facts, it's not dealing with a report, a white paper, it's just trying to get the target of public opinion on the other guy? Or how often if you're formal leaders, which most of you are, how often do you find people want to blame you rather than look at the complexity of the situation? This is another example of not thinking. And the other thing we're getting very good at is bureaucracy. Increasing policies, increasing procedures, increasing audits, report writing. I have family in London, and they have a health clinic, an NHS clinic, right across the street from their house. And 2 days ago, I was walking by, and there's a new sign up on the window which said, "This clinic will be closed on Thursday afternoons, so we can get through our paperwork." It will not diminish your health care. But we won't be available on Thursday afternoons because we have to go through all this crazy report writing. Think about in your own work whether this has become true, that you're accountable for more measures, for filing reports, for implementing more and more policies that you know don't make any sense. I have a colleague in the States who showed me that the number of policies that have now been created by state and federal officials for dealing with early childhood is up to 1,800. Where does that get you? So just notice whether these trends are showing up in your own work. And then this is an increasing problem. People are distracted by so many tasks, overwhelmed and exhausted. How often do you feel overwhelmed or exhausted these days? And what do you do when you feel that way? And just notice the level of distraction. Like, can you sit and concentrate on anything for several hours anymore? If you sit down to read a book, if you're reading books still, you know, how long can you stay with a book? There's a lot of, you know, commentary about how our minds now just flit from thing to thing to thing. And of course, then you can't think. You can't go deeply into something. You just, you know, click to the next item. By the way, I didn't mention that when the human brain is under stress, the one thing we become good at is making lists. It's a kind of memory. It's not memory, it's just you list all your tasks. And I recently read an article that said half of the apps for smartphones are about, you know, making lists, time efficiencies, you know, writing down everything, because who remembers anymore, right? So the good news with this is that memory loss is not so much related to age. It's really related to attention. And you can get back your memory, no matter your age, by really starting to pay attention and listen well. So we think listening skills are important anyway to build community, but in fact, if you discipline yourself to really listen to somebody, you're also recreating your memory. Now, isn't that a good thing? So here's just to end this rather dark assessment, I was recently in the UK about to go, I was willing to offer a day to an NHS exec who's very overwhelmed, and it was going to be a day on sort of taking time to think and perseverance. And she really wanted me to come, but she wrote back this to my colleagues. She said, "Dear Martin, I haven't had the time to do anything with that yet. I will try and give you a call to discuss, but I'm drowning in workload faster than a brick the size of a large meteorite at the moment." Does any of that feel familiar to you at different times or not? And then from the US, the CEO of a very large nonprofit that I work closely with wrote me this one day. "We feel as though we are crossing a rushing river by jumping from rock to rock, and at each leap wondering if there will be another rock, the ones we've just left disappearing. Even as we lift our feet, we cannot see the shore." This for me is the best description of groundlessness, uncertainty, and this is a very wise, forward-thinking woman leader. I mean, she's incredible. But that feeling of, you know, you just respond, react, and the past vanishes and the future doesn't come into view. If you're not experiencing this, please be grateful. Okay? It's coming. This is a general trend. As we get computers doing more of the work, seemingly doing more of the work, what we don't notice is we're also losing our mental capacity, and we're losing our ability to think. Therefore, we're losing our human capacity. So this is why I think we need to not deny what's going on in the world, because then it really does help us to clarify what we want our work to be. Now, just two little moments here. This is quite an old, old poster from the 30s, I think, but very fitting, yeah? And then in terms of not thinking, the consequences of not thinking. So it is up to us to really know what we believe in as a bedrock belief about human capacity, and understand that that work these days is countercultural, revolutionary, and absolutely essential for the future. And here's a few, I don't want to cheer you up too quickly, but here are some really good ways of well, good things going on. So this is from a New York Times, our major paper in the States. A craving for a simpler, slower, more centered life, one less consumed by the soul-emptying crush of getting and spending, runs deep within our culture right now. And so, you know, one of the reasons people may be dying young here, or health is going down, it's not just this pessimism, but I think it's increasingly the meaninglessness of life. You know, if you don't have time to be with your kids, if you are choosing drugs or alcohol because it's all too painful, if nothing seems to be working well, that creates a kind of meaninglessness for people. And it is this, I love this phrase. I was thinking of you last night, Carol, when you were talking about materialism being the problem. Yes, the soul-emptying crush of getting and spending. So that's one commentator, a reporter, and then from a Buddhist teacher friend of mine. He said our way forward is in cultivating well-being in communities rather than individually accumulating more things. And then a Harvard Business School economist wrote, Juliet Shore, she wrote a book called Plenitude, lovely old-fashioned word. And she said it calls attention to the inherent bounty of nature that we need to recover. It directs us to the chance to be rich in the things that matter most to us and the wealth that is available in our relations with one another. So when I have worked out in the world with this belief, this clarity, we say that we are working to help people realize that the real source of wealth is in each other, in cultural traditions, and in the land, or in the present environment. We need to redefine wealth as other than money. We need to redefine productivity as other than hours spent on the job. I mean, this morning I was listening to an economist. I just wanted to reach through the telly and just strangle him. I have to deal with my rage often. And what he was saying is that all this celebration, this two-day bank holiday, you know, we've lost millions of days of work. And therefore, it's been a real deficit for Britain. Well, excuse me, I'm an outsider, but I look at all this, you know, coming together and celebration and community. Even, I know I'm in Scotland, but, you know, bear with me. I was part of the flotilla watching that. This is an incredible sense of being together, even if you don't like what they're together about. But such deep sense of community. And to not see that at all and just say, well, we've lost millions of days of work here. Oh, can't stand it. So I've already raised this question for you, but this is the theme of everything I'm saying. And there's something from history that I want to bring forward, which is that things never change from cautious pessimists. Things never change from careful analysis. Things only change when people feel they have no choice but to become champions for a cause or a group of people, or in today's talk, when we become warriors for the human spirit. So I want to just show you how important it is to claim a role for ourselves that is not normal, not conventional. So here are a few quotes from Pema Chodron, Buddhist teacher. She said, this is the choice. The whole globe is shook up, so what are you going to do when things are falling apart? Well, two choices. You're either going to become more fundamentalist and try and hold things together, or you're going to forsake the old ambitions and goals and live life as an experiment, making it up as you go along. I'd like to introduce this concept right now, that for everything you are trying to accomplish that's focused on awakening community and awakening people's capacity in community, that's all really experimental. As one scientist said, in this day and age, if you're not making it up as you go along, you're really out of touch with reality, because reality is changing all the time. And I will, by the end of my remarks, really focus on the qualities of living together with generosity and forgiveness, willing to make mistakes, because we have to make it up as we go along. And what we're doing, I'm going to say it over and over again, is distinctly counter the cultural trends and dynamics of this time. Rudolf Barrow, who's a great German activist, now gone, said that when an old culture is dying, the new culture is born from a few people who are not afraid to be insecure. A few people. That's how the world, Margaret Mead described it. Never underestimate the power of a small group of dedicated people to change the world. It's the only thing that ever does. Are you familiar with that wonderful quote? That's why Rory quoted me. I only want to preach to the choir. I'm not interested in masses, because that's not how the world changes. The world changes from small groups of dedicated people. And that's been my experience. So we need to be together. We need to know what our songbook contains, what we're struggling for, and we need to make sure that we not get separated or torn apart by the dynamics of this time. So the last quote about who these brave people are is from Rainer Maria Rilke, who said, again and again, some people in the crowd wake up. They have no ground in the crowd, and they emerge according to broader laws. They carry strange customs with them and demand room for bold gestures. The future speaks ruthlessly through them. I love this quote. But it is who I invite you to be if you're not already. Where you are demanding, the future is speaking to you, and it's a future about possibility and human potential and human capacity. It's not about increased bureaucracy, it's not about increased fear, it's not about money as the measure of success or material goods. The future, if it's already spoken to you, then puts you in this place of no ground in the crowd. And instead, really finding our way to figure out how to make things better for the lives of people and using community as the resource. So my most recent book is called Walk Out, Walk On. And it's about 7 communities where people realized no one was coming to help. They had truly been abandoned by the authorities, by the government, by foundations, And you know, that is a place I envy. When you truly know that you can't depend on anyone else except who's around you. That's a place of liberation. We still struggle to write the grant, to get the funding, to comply, to look obedient even though we're not, and to make it all work within the system. And once you give up on that, it's actually quite liberating. So walk out, walk on is a phrase that was given to us by youth in India. They were high school students, so they were, 15, 16, and they had simply reached the end of their rope with the factory model of education in India. They weren't being taught anything useful. They couldn't be creative. They just felt they were suffocating there or shrinking. So they walked out. Now the school authorities immediately said, "Oh, you're a failure. You dropped out. You're a failure." And the kids immediately turned around and said, "No, no, no, we're not the failure. You're the failure. You failed us." That was the first important step. So walking out is always a declaration to oneself, as scared as you might be to lead, but it's a declaration that I know I can be more. I know I have more potential. I know I could be more creative. So there's some deep inner knowing that I am better than this current situation is allowing me to be. And then the second stage is walking on after you leave that limiting situation. Could be a job, a physical space, a relationship, or an idea about yourself. Once you abandon that and walk out, then you find the place where you can grow and blossom, where you can walk on. So this is a very affirmative process. And this is, again, how history changes. Again and again, some people in the crowd wake up. So one of the ideas we must walk out of is this. Let's just take a moment here and think about the assumptions about human nature that are contained in this. If you'd like to offer something, just speak out and I'll repeat it. Control. Lack of trust. Lack of trust. Hierarchy. And hierarchy. Worth, yes. Where are the most valuable people? Just where they should be, at the top. Yeah. So along with that goes arrogance, yes. Power, for sure. Yeah.
Sometimes you don't even make the bottom list.
Sometimes you don't even make the bottom? Yes.
Top down.
And top down, yeah. So all of this has a fundamental view of human nature, and I just want to lay it out from your remarks and my thinking about this. The first view is that some people are superior. And therefore, if they are superior to the rest of us, they deserve privilege, they deserve power, they deserve control. And they can get away with whatever they damn well please, because they're better than we are. And so that, for me, is the basic premise of hierarchy. In ancient times, it used to be like you were the sun king, or, you know, you you had God-given rights. And now it's just political rights that you achieve through very nasty processes. But still, the basic premise here is that some people are better than others. Now, if you're working in community with that premise, you're not going to go very far, right? This is what life looks like. When you really look at how life organizes, it's always networks of interdependent relationships, always. We made up the hierarchical stuff. So I just, because I'm interested in you being firm in your commitment and understanding of community and the power of everyday people, I want to give you the grandest view I can of why relationships are all there is. So we're going back up into the universe here. This is a photo from the Hubble telescope. And for me, I put it up there to just momentarily tell you what you may have already heard, but in quantum theory, when scientists try and find the smallest little particle, such as with the Hadron Collider right now, the smallest little unit is not visible ever as an independent, self-existing entity. The only time you can see things in a particle collider is when they collide. Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? It's all about meeting. It's all about coming together. So the basic building blocks of life are relationships. And then I just have to express my annoyance at how we still don't get this, right? And think of all the negative ways in which relationships are described. You know, soft, touchy-feely is modest, but here I've heard the phrase ooey-wooey. In Australia, I heard the phrase hippie shit. In the US now, it's kumbaya moments, you know, or group hugs, so I don't want to go there. So we're still denigrating relationships while the science is leaping ahead, and traditional native cultures have never forgotten that we are all connected, that it's all about relationships. So what this says is that individual is a man-made fiction. We made it up years ago, tried to see the world through this, but in fact, what's really going on is that nothing living lives alone, period. You can't understand anything that happens by blaming one leader or looking for one single cause. And as we get more distracted and more frantic, that's exactly what we do. We keep changing leaders, right? As if we'll find the ideal hero who will solve all our problems. Or when something goes wrong in a community, we say, well, it's those people or just that one reason. So one of the things we're losing in our ability to think is we're losing the ability to understand this, that life is inherently connected, and therefore, this is the conclusion, there's never a single person to blame or a single group to blame. But in the current politics of these days, that's exactly what politicians are doing. Let's take our eye off the real problem and just say, well, if we had fewer immigrants, we wouldn't have this problem, period. Or if we just had more money, we'd solve everything. Or if we just change leaders, we'll fix things. So the inability to understand life's beautiful complexity is really, I think, another reason I say we are devolving. So again, from a quantum theorist comes this wonderful statement with this very cute picture, that we are all bundles of potential that manifest only in relationship. You don't know who you are, you don't know who anybody is until they're in a relationship. So I can say quite firmly that in my own experience, the way this shows up is that when somebody cares deeply about an issue, no matter their background, their economic status, their culture, when they care, they step forward to do something about it if they don't retreat. So the caring that leads to courageous action then suddenly they show enormous potential. So I'd like you to just think for a moment, when have you ever been surprised by someone's potential? Like you thought they were really dull and lazy and didn't care, and then something happened and suddenly you saw a whole different person. Have you had this experience? Think about your partners, think about your children, and then also think about your experience with people who step forward to be leaders. I work with the definition that a leader in this world is not only a formal position, but the world is filled with millions of leaders because of the definition that a leader is anyone who sees something they care about and is then willing to help. Steps forward, can't not do something. So this is one way in which the world gives us great gifts. If we were in better relationships with each other, we would discover gifts in ourselves and gifts in others. I have seen so many examples of this that I say quite securely that leaders are made, not born. And they're made from the connection at the heart level, which is where courage comes from. It always comes from the heart, not the head. It's the French word for heart, kind of gives it away there. But when a person connects with something they care about, then they step forward and they start to act. That's moving into leadership in my book. So this is a great gift from this world. Now, a second piece from biology is this principle that if you want to create health in a system, you create stronger connections. I'm so intrigued when a biologist who really understands this says, well, we just need to strengthen connections. That's called community, right? This is the solution here. This is why I say whatever the problem, community is the answer. Because whatever we're facing, if we can strengthen the connections and bring in people that we formerly have ignored, bring in the voices of youth, bring in the voices of the elders, bring in the voices of the new immigrants, bring in diversity. If we can strengthen our connections in that way, then I know that health is possible. Now, the word health comes from an Old English word for wholeness, so it already had this in it. You can only become healthy if you're whole. And the word wholeness comes from an older word for holiness. The Bible says, whenever two or more are gathered, there will I be also. So how do we understand the sacredness of human beings, the qualities of the human spirit? Well, you have to be together. And this is wisdom that was held for us in traditional cultures all over the world. I don't know if you've heard this word Ubuntu. It's become rather popular, but it's a beautiful concept that, in this example, it's Kosa, but Archbishop Tutu is a major spokesperson for this. We exist in a bundle of belonging. Another definition of this elusive concept of Ubuntu is I exist through you, you exist through we. Another way of saying it is a person is only a person through other people. But this awareness of we do not exist alone is, in my experience, has been kept for us by traditional people. So I worked quite a bit in Australia, and I was given this beautiful term, Didiri. I don't know which peoples, there are over 1,000 languages in Australia, but deep and respectful listening as the means to build community. Just being present and then allowing the relationship to yield its potential. This is simple. This isn't about training people. It's not about writing the right analysis, gathering the data. This is about creating the conditions in which people can come together and be present for each other. And in my work, when people are in these conversations, then they discover this common human basis. So I've been in conversations with parents of children. Some of the parents are terribly poor. Some of the parents are quite affluent. And they thought they had nothing in common, and then they discovered they each care about their children and the future. So that gave them the means to start to work together. You know, in any of your communities, there are always the issues that if we were in deep, respectful listening with one another, we would discover what they were. And that would create a connection. That would start to create more wholeness, which would create more health. And what we're up against does not make this simple, because we're up against polarization, fear, stress, overwhelm, exhaustion, people just not having time. But once you create the means for people to sit together in a good conversation, then it sells itself. People really light up. I mean, I'd be interested in Rory's experience in hosting all these conversations last year that gave rise to this very good report, by the way. He minimized it. I thought it was really excellent. Once you bring people together, they remember in some vague way, wow, this is really good. This is so much better than yelling at each other or watching the telly or reading a paper. This is really interesting. And it's interesting and healthy because it's basically human. So just want to say a few more things about healthy community. This is a picture I took in Senegal of women. And what I discovered when I was in Senegal in West Africa, traditional, you know, an African nation with the whole complexity of problems, poverty, illiteracy, over-literacy, and that they had 100,000 people with graduate degrees and no work, which is starting to happen in Western countries now. Terrible pollution. I mean, you'd go into the shower and the shower would be black with the pollution that had accumulated in your hair and skin. However, they do not have suicide. So this, for me, made me sit up, because I'm sure there are many of you who've been touched directly by suicide. It's an epidemic in the world, especially among young people, but also among farmers in India, farmers in the United States now. People who can no longer bear their lives. So to come to a culture where there is no suicide, and I don't think Senegal is the only one, but I know of it there, tells us that something else is possible, right? This isn't human nature to feel you have to leap. So when I asked them, how's this possible you don't have suicide? And they just looked at me like I was an idiot, which I was, saying, well, we have each other. Nobody goes hungry, nobody goes homeless. We always are there for each other. And then a woman from the US who lived in Dakar for 14 years in Senegal told me that this had been her experience, and she relayed the time when she was feeling deathly ill, and everyone came to her room and just sat there, sort of surrounded her in a circle of caring. Now, this is not my idea of what I want when I feel I'm close to death. You know, it's like, just leave me alone until I can die here. But the thought of leaving her alone was just completely foreign. Now, another friend of mine who works with Native American tribes in the northwest of the US and Canada I think this happened near Vancouver in Canada. There was one tribe that had an outbreak of teen suicides. Nearly a dozen kids had killed themselves. And this is the incident that stopped that. There was a young man standing on a bridge. He was going to throw himself into the water. He didn't even notice that the river was called the River of Life. But while he was standing on the bridge, a car went by and somebody just waved. That's all. And it stopped him. And then when he told everyone in the community or his mom or whatever what had stopped him, then that became the key to understanding. The issue here is belonging. The issue here is Ubuntu. We live in a bundle of belonging. And this is wisdom that's been held for us in many traditional cultures. My own direct experiences in Southern Africa and those nations, or Senegal, but we got incredibly off track by thinking we can make it on our own. And no matter the Scottish overlay, I really, I'm going to now give you time to be in conversation, because what I've been talking about is basic to human nature. One of the horrible things with globalization is we are now destroying community everywhere. In Senegal, in Southern African countries, in traditional cultures, they have lost the fabric that held them together, and they've lost it through materialism, through the lure of the Western lifestyle. That's a great tragedy, but it's still there. This is just my final offering to you before we end. And this is the cover of this very small book. I'm not trying to promote the book, I'm just trying to focus you on perseverance. But I do want to point out that the cover itself is a work of art created by a young artist who had to persevere. And how she constructed this piece of art is worth noticing. She lived in New Orleans. She formerly trained as an artist. And then after Katrina, her whole family was split up. Her whole community was gone, which was the great tragedy of Katrina. It just split up 5 generations of people, families who'd been together. They call it the diaspora. So she was sent far from where her other family members were. She was sent to San Diego, California. And one morning, as her healing process began, she didn't know it, but she went to sit in a canyon and she was being bathed by very gentle winds. And she just picked up what she had with her to create this beautiful figure. So if you look up here, you can tell it's a cardboard box that she just opened to use as her canvas. And then she, all the white is just tissue paper she had with her. So she unwrapped something and she had all this tissue paper, so she started layering that. And there's blossoms on her head, which were real live blossoms that were just lying there on the ground, as well as, and then she had a pencil and did the rest. So for me, it's a beautiful emblem of perseverance as we work with what we have, and we have enough to create beauty and to create a sense of deep appreciation for life. So I just want to say a few things about perseverance. Our ultimate motivation is from Archbishop Tutu, that what we do because we are motivated by love, and that creates many more demands. I wish every leader would know this as a principle for how to motivate people. People are motivated when they care. And if we don't care about things, then you can put all the laws, policies, threats, rewards into the system, and you still don't get commitment. But hopefully you know this, that what you're reaching for in your work when it's with community is to find what people care about, and then you will find accountability, creativity, and connection. So the word perseverance in the Chinese character is quite interesting. It has two components. This is a knife suspended over a human heart. So that's what persevering requires. However you want to interpret this, I'm going to give you a few interpretations. That it may be that our hearts are opened, are cut open by human suffering or personal tragedy, and therefore we gain courage to persevere. It may mean that we always feel under threat, like at any moment we could lose our funding, lose our job, or lose an important relationship. But it's a state of risk, of persevering. I mean, it just has that, there's no safety, there's no clinging to old ways. The work we're doing is experimental and essential for the growth of human beings. But another way of, I did get Rory's approval that you could handle this photo. Another way that we often experience trials and tribulations in our work for community is probably, can you see that well enough to see what it is? So this is a cow whose head is stuck under a fence. Can you tell it's a cow? Okay, because you need to know it's a cow for the next photo, which is, this is what happens to us when we get in a hard place. So how many NGO leaders or community workers feel this way? I don't know. So I just want to end with just a few things for you to remember to guide your own behavior. And it is the question of what keeps us able to persevere as we try and create the changes that we know the world so desperately needs. Just three things. The first thing is we must learn from what we do. This is how all life works. As I said earlier, that living and learning are synonyms, direct synonyms. But so often in your work, if you're under pressure, if things aren't going well, if you're afraid you're going to get blamed, these are all very common things we struggle with these days. And so we stop, we don't take time to learn from our mistakes. I would love to get rid of the word mistakes, and it sounds like this would be a very good word to abolish in Scottish and Scotland. But after everything you do, simply to sit together with colleagues and ask, so what did we learn? What worked? What didn't work? What can we learn that we'll take into the next project? Because if you're living life as an experiment and experimenting with new ways of doing things, then let's become good scientists, please, and learn from the data that comes back from the work. And in this era of being blamed and being threatened, of losing one's funding or non-compliance, it's very hard to take time to learn because you don't want to get above the radar, so do it below the radar. You know, just don't make it a big public brouhaha. Just get together with colleagues and figure out what just happened and what could we learn from this. In that way, you will develop strength, confidence, and expertise. This is what human brains are for, to figure out what works, what doesn't, and how to continue to learn. And the second injunction for you is to absolutely pay exquisite attention to how you are together. Now, we know the elements of good relationships. We do not need any more surveys about this. You know, I mean, I just want to stop for a moment. What does it say about our culture that we need to have happiness established as a good thing? or relationships established as a good thing. I mean, how warped did we become? So the elements that make up for good relationships, it's in the Golden Rule, it's in every great spiritual tradition, but it's about forgiveness and compassion, and also about generosity of spirit, not doing. The spirit of Ubuntu is we exist together, and therefore if I do something for you, I'm doing it for myself. So that spirit of generosity, which is throughout human history, it's just our own warped time that tells us, no, we're not generous. We're basically self-serving. And the reason we're falling into this self-servingness is complex, but it's being used against us right now also. So the first thing is attend to learning. Second is attend to relationships. And the third is no matter what, make sure you stay together. Do not let these times divide you. We're all in the same boat. And the times work, the dynamics of this time work to divide and separate and pit one against the other, highly competitive for funds, for grants, for approval, for notoriety. Don't please let any of that keep you from strengthening your relationships and staying together. Because in my own work experience, humans can get through anything as long as we're together. And we can't get through anything alone. But the dynamics of this time are about separation and fear. So this is where we become strongly counter the culture. So I thought I'd close by sharing with you what I hope to put on my gravestone, although I actually don't plan to have a gravestone. But I love this quote. We were together, I forget the rest. So thank you very much for today.